You have not been living with one mind. You have been living with a small chamber of minds that share one body and one calendar. One voice wants motion, another wants safety, another wants quiet, and none of them feel like strangers when they speak. You call it mood, you call it personality, you call it being human, but the pattern keeps repeating until you admit that something inside you is organized. Even your confusion has structure, and that structure has been negotiating your life without ever introducing itself. The first time you hear the counsel clearly, it is not dramatic. It is inconvenient. It shows up when you try to act and you cannot. When you try to rest and you feel guilty. When you try to speak and you swallow the sentence. One part pushes, one part pulls, one part freezes the room by naming every risk. You may tell yourself that you are indecisive, yet the truth is closer to crowded. You are not lacking willpower. You are lacking a meeting place, and that is why decisions leak energy. A quiet objection rises here. Because you do not want to turn inward and start talking to imaginary characters. You do not want to perform a spiritual skit and call it healing. That objection is healthy, because it protects you from making a religion out of confusion. But notice what the objection is really saying. It is saying that your inner conflict is not real enough to deserve language. It is saying that the only real thing is what you can prove, even as your day keeps being shaped by invisible arguments. There is a difference between pretending and listening. Pretending is when you invent a voice to entertain yourself. Listening is when you stop overriding what is already there. If you pay attention, you will find that the voices do not appear when you want them. They appear when they need something. They interrupt your plans with fatigue. They interrupt your stillness with urgency. They interrupt your confidence with doubt that feels like a hand on the shoulder. Something inside you has been speaking for years. And the only question is whether you keep calling it noise. So you begin in the simplest way. You do not chase visions. You do not force revelations. You do not demand an answer that will fix your life tonight. You locate the moment where you feel divided, and you name the division without judging it. One part says move, one part says wait, one part says do not risk looking foolish. You sit with the tension long enough to feel that these are not random moods. They are roles that formed for reasons you might not fully remember. The body confirms the counsel before the mind does. The pushing voice often rides in the chest as forward heat. The guarding voice often rides in the throat as tightness, like a gate that closes mid-sentence. The exhausted voice sits behind the eyes, heavy and dim, as if the world is too loud. If you have ever wondered why your emotions feel physical, it is because each voice recruits the nervous system as proof. And you have been living inside that proof. Another objection rises, and this one sounds practical. If I do this, will I fall apart? If I let the voices speak, will they get louder? If I stop suppressing, will I lose control and become someone unrecognizable? That fear is not irrational, because you have seen people drown in their own inner storms. But there is a difference between being consumed by voices and giving them structure, and your life already shows what happens when structure is missing. When a counsel is ignored, it does not disappear, it becomes sabotage. The protector starts creating delays that look like distractions. The wounded part starts generating sudden sadness at the exact moment you need confidence. The ambitious part starts demanding more output than the body can pay for, then shaming you for collapsing. You may think you are choosing your actions, but often you are managing internal fallout. The meeting is not what creates the conflict. The meeting is what reveals it. There is a reason some voices feel older than you. Not older in years, older in posture. They speak like they have been here through repeated versions of you. Through different jobs, different relationships, different phases where you said you would change. One voice remembers consequences. Another voice remembers humiliation. Another voice remembers being alone with no one coming back. You may not have a clear story for why they formed, yet the tone of their urgency tells you they were forged under pressure. If you treat them as childish, they become louder, because nobody calms down when they are dismissed. So you build the chamber with rules that are simple enough to obey. No voice is mocked. No voice is crowned as the only truth. Every voice is allowed to finish a thought, and every voice must answer one question before it leaves. What are you protecting? What are you trying to secure? The counsel does not need your belief. It needs your honesty. You are not seeking a mystical identity, you are seeking operational clarity, and that clarity never arrives if you skip the hard questions. This is where the work turns sharp, because you realize the council is not mostly about feelings. It is about power. Each voice has a method for steering your life, and each method has been reinforced by outcomes. The protector learned that caution prevents pain, so it values prevention over possibility. The ambitious voice learned that output earns respect, so it values speed over health. The quiet voice learned that stillness reduces threat, so it values withdrawal over engagement. And none of these values are evil, yet they can destroy you if they run alone. A third objection appears, and it sounds like morality. If I admit these parts, am I making excuses? If I let the wounded voice speak, am I justifying weakness? If I hear the protector, am I letting fear lead my life? That objection is often the voice of an internal judge, a part that believes worth is earned through control. It wants you to be clean and consistent, because inconsistency feels like danger. But the judge is not actually solving anything. It is enforcing silence, and silence is not the same as strength. You do not defeat the judge by arguing with it. You defeat it by making it sit down and speak like everyone else. What are you afraid will happen if you allow complexity? What do you lose if you stop performing coherence? The judge often confesses that it fears rejection more than failure, because rejection feels like exile. When you hear that, the council begins to reveal its true purpose. Each voice is trying to keep you inside belonging, even if its strategy is outdated. Now the chamber becomes a map of your life. Every recurring problem has a voice behind it, and every voice has a memory behind it, and every memory has a sensation behind it. The council is not just mental, it is embodied history. When you cannot finish a project, you can often find a voice that associates completion with exposure. When you overcommit, you can often find a voice that associates rest with being left behind. The patterns are not random, they are rehearsed, and rehearsal creates identity without asking permission. You begin to notice that the most convincing voice is not always the wisest one. It is simply the one with the strongest nervous system leverage. When anxiety spikes, the protector suddenly becomes the leader, because the body believes it. When excitement spikes, the ambitious voice becomes leader, because the body believes it. When fatigue hits, the quiet voice becomes leader, because the body believes it. You have been calling this being realistic, being driven, being tired, but those are labels that hide a rotation of authority. This is where many people quit, because they want a single true self. They want one captain, one clean identity, one steady desire. They want the council to dissolve into a simple answer. But the council is not the problem. The lack of a chair above the council is the problem. Without that chair, every voice fights for control, and control is always justified in the moment. You are not here to kill voices. You are here to establish a higher level of governance, and that requires patience you cannot fake. Another objection rises, and it is spiritual in disguise. If there is a higher self, why are there so many voices? If you are meant to be whole, why does wholeness feel like a negotiation? If you have an oversoul, why do you still feel fragmented inside the human day? That objection tries to turn unity into a weapon, as if divided experience is a failure of evolution. But division is not always a defect. It can be a function of incarnation, and function still demands skill. Because incarnation creates roles. A role forms to handle danger. A role forms to handle hunger for meaning. A role forms to handle the need to be seen. A role forms to handle the need to endure. If you have lived long enough, you have recruited an inner workforce. An oversoul expression does not erase the workforce. It learns how to conduct it, and conduct is different from suppression. The council is evidence that you survived, and survival always creates specialists. So the first practice is not asking for truth, it is asking for sequence. Who speaks first? Who interrupts? Who hijacks the wheel when pressure rises? You track it like weather. You learn that some voices appear after certain people, certain tasks, certain hours of the day. You learn that the protector speaks louder when you are about to be perceived. You learn that the ambitious voice speaks louder when you are about to feel ordinary. These are not random shadows. They are predictable reactions, and prediction is the beginning of freedom. The second practice is asking for cost. Each voice must name what it trades away when it leads. The ambitious voice must admit what it sacrifices, usually sleep, intimacy, and long-range health. The protector must admit what it sacrifices, usually opportunity, connection, and creative risk. The quiet voice must admit what it sacrifices, usually momentum, visibility, and growth through friction. When each voice admits its cost, the council starts sounding less like destiny and more like strategy, and strategies can be revised. The third practice is asking for what none of them can provide alone. Safety without stagnation, growth without self-betrayal, stillness without disappearance. This is where the pressure builds, because you realize the council cannot solve itself with one more argument. A higher integration must appear, not as a perfect answer, but as a capacity to hold competing needs without collapse. That capacity is not a concept. It is a trained inner posture, and you do not have it yet in the way you want. And this is the moment where you stop pretending you are one voice. You become the one who listens to the voices. Not as a therapist, not as a mystic, not as a performer, but as the seat that can hold contradiction without panicking. You will not get a final answer today, because final answers end movement. But you can get something more dangerous, which is awareness of how your life has been steered, and why the steering has felt like fate. Once you see the council, you cannot unsee it, and that changes what you will tolerate. The next time a single voice tries to speak as if it is the whole of you, you may have thought the chair above the council was the solution, as if awareness could step in, take the seat, and finally govern. That belief feels clean because it gives you a role you can respect. But the moment you try to sit there for real, you find something disturbing. Awareness is not automatically the leader, because some parts do not recognize it as authority. They recognize pressure as authority. They recognize pain as authority. They recognize urgency as authority. And they have been voting for those rulers longer than you have been watching. The first destabilization is simple and it cuts deep. The council does not gather only because you lack a meeting place. It gathers because some of its members are not trying to collaborate. Some voices are not merely specialists, they are insurgents. They did not form to advise you. They form to override you when the stakes feel high enough. And they will call it protection, while quietly building a life that never risks the wound they fear. A resistance rises here because it sounds too harsh. You want to believe every inner voice is innocent. Every part is just a hurt child seeking love. That belief is comforting, and it keeps you from facing what your own patterns prove. Some inner strategies will happily destroy your future to prevent a repeat of an old moment. And they will do it without hatred, without malice, and without apology, because they were never built for long-range meaning. You see it whenever you are closest to momentum. The plan starts to work, the clarity rises, and then a small shift happens inside you that looks like fatigue but feels like sabotage. You find a reason to delay. You find a flaw that was not there yesterday. You find a new obligation that must be handled first. You tell yourself you are being responsible. But something inside you is moving the goalpost because a rival creates exposure. And exposure is the one thing the protector cannot tolerate. Another part counters from the other side because it hates this framing. It says that if you talk like this, you will make yourself paranoid. You will turn ordinary human inconsistency into a conspiracy. You will lose trust in your own mind. That caution is not wrong, but it is incomplete. Because you do not need paranoia to acknowledge pattern. You only need honesty about what keeps repeating, especially when the repetition costs you years. The second destabilization arrives when you notice that the council is not fully inside you. The most forceful voices do not sound like private thoughts. They sound like inherited law. They speak in the language of family systems, culture, status games, survival economics, and the silent rules you absorbed long before you chose your identity. When those voices speak, they do not say, "I feel afraid." They say, "This is how the world works." And the certainty makes them hard to question. This matters because it means the council is partly an interface. Some voices are yours, some are borrowed. Some are installed by environments that needed you to behave a certain way, and some are echoes of people whose approval you still chase even if you believe you stopped. You may have thought you were arguing with yourself, but many of your inner debates are reenactments of old rooms, old tones, old power dynamics, replaying through you like a script that learned how to self-operate. A resistance rises again, because you do not want to blame your past for your present. You do not want to sound like someone who cannot take responsibility. But responsibility is not denial. Responsibility is accurate attribution. If a voice in you speaks with the authority of a parent, a teacher, a cruel peer group, a religious threat, or a grinding economic reality, then pretending it is purely you does not make you stronger. It makes you easier to control. So the council work shifts from listening to discernment. You start asking not only what does this voice want, but where did it learn to want it this way? You start noticing accents in your own thinking, the phrases you did not invent, the moral rules that arrive without explanation, the fear responses that belong to old contexts. You stop treating your mind as a single kingdom and start treating it as a borderland shaped by migrations. This is where the idea of a higher chair gets complicated, because awareness is not the only seat. There is also the seat of identity, the one that says this is who I am. There is also the seat of image, the one that says this is how I must appear. There is also the seat of mission, the one that says this is what I must accomplish. These seats compete, and whichever seat is active becomes the lens that appoints the council leaders for the day. A counter voice pushes back because it wants a shortcut. It wants a single method that will stabilize everything, a mantra, a ritual, an internal command that makes the voices fall into line. It wants governance without relationship. But councils do not submit to force. They submit to trust, and trust cannot be demanded. If you try to dominate your inner system, you will get compliance for a moment and rebellion later. Because parts that feel coerced become more covert, not more healed. So you build a practice that does not flatter you. Instead of asking who am I, you ask who is speaking through me right now and what is it afraid will happen if it does not speak. Instead of asking what is my purpose, you ask what purpose is being used as a weapon against my body. Instead of asking what do I feel, you ask which feeling is being amplified to control my behavior, and which feeling is being suppressed to protect an image. The council begins to reveal that not all inner conflict is disagreement. Some of it is hostage negotiation. A part threatens panic if you move forward. A part threatens emptiness if you slow down. A part threatens shame if you rest. Each threat is paired with a memory that you may not fully see, but the nervous system remembers it perfectly. This is why insight alone does not free you. Because the body treats insight like a suggestion while treating old threat like law. A resistance rises here that sounds reasonable and tired. It says this is too much work. It says that normal people do not need this. It says that you are making your life heavier by looking this closely. That voice is often the exhaustion voice wearing the mask of realism. It is not trying to help you evolve. It is trying to stop you from touching the deeper layers. Because deeper layers mean feeling what was postponed. And postponement has been one of your main survival skills. This is where you learn a brutal truth about the internal council. Some parts only exist because you never finished what happened. They form to hold unfinished emotion in a sealed container so you could keep functioning. They do not want integration, because integration means opening the container, and opening the container risks a flood. When you approach these parts, they do not argue with ideas. They trigger sensations, because sensation is faster than thought. So you stop trying to win debates and you start tracking thresholds. How close can you get to a forbidden memory before the body slams the door? How long can you sit with a feeling before a different voice arrives to distract you? What topic makes you sleepy? What topic makes you angry? What topic makes you suddenly crave stimulation? These are not random quirks. They are boundary systems. Your inner world has walls, and the walls were built for reasons that were once necessary. A counter voice appears that wants to romanticize the walls. It says the walls are sacred. It says the walls are protection. It says you should not disturb what kept you alive. That voice has a point, because tearing down defenses without skill can destabilize you. But the other side is also true. Walls that once saved you can later imprison you, and a prison can feel like safety until you notice how small your life has become inside it. Now the council work moves into 3 vectors at once, and this is where it becomes real rather than poetic. The first vector is behavioral. You watch what you do when no one is watching. The micro choices, the procrastination rituals, the overwork spirals, the sudden withdrawals, the compulsive explaining, the avoidance disguised as preparation. Each behavior is a vote cast by a part, and each vote reveals who has been winning your days. The second vector is relational. You notice how different parts of you come online around different people. Around some people, the performer takes the chair. Around others, the protector takes the chair. Around others, the caretaker takes the chair. Around others, the rebel takes the chair. You call it chemistry, but it is often activation. Relationships are not just external bonds. They are internal switches. If you do not know which part is driving, you will keep mistaking activation for truth. The third vector is metaphysical, and this is where spiral consciousness becomes more than a metaphor. The council is not only psychology, it is a local expression of a larger field of self. The oversoul expression is not a single voice that replaces the parts. It is a depth that can hold them without collapsing into any one of them. But that depth cannot override the nervous system by decree. It must be embodied through repeated returns. An embodiment is slow, because it competes with old survival law. A resistance rises because the mind wants to use the metaphysical vector as escape. It wants to leap into oversoul language and float above the hard work of sensation and pattern. It wants to declare that it is infinite and therefore not bound by trauma, not bound by conditioning, not bound by human struggle. That move sounds elevated, but it often serves the same function as dissociation. It is a clean way to avoid the meeting, and it leaves the council unchanged. So the practice becomes unglamorous. When a voice claims universal truth, you ask what it is trying to avoid feeling. When a voice claims absolute doubt, You ask what it is trying to prevent you from risking. When a voice claims urgency, you ask what wound it is trying to outrun. You stop letting any voice speak as God, and you stop letting any voice speak as doom, and you treat both extremes as forms of control. Here, the earlier belief that awareness can lead begins to crack in a useful way. Awareness does not lead because it is higher. Awareness leads only when it is trusted, and trust is earned by action. When you return to the chair consistently, when you do not abandon parts when they bring ugly truth, when you do not exile parts that complicate your image, when you do not reward sabotage by giving it the whole day, the system begins to update, but it updates reluctantly, because it does not know if you will remain. A counter voice tries to bargain. It says you can do the work later. It says you can wait until life is calmer. It says you can keep functioning on old strategies until you have more time. It sounds wise, but it hides the trap. Life rarely becomes calm by itself. Calm is usually built by a self that can hold tension without fleeing. If you wait for ease before you learn governance, then you keep living under the same rotations of authority. So you make one demand of yourself that the council cannot easily twist. You demand that no decision is made only to stop discomfort. This does not mean you chase pain. It means you stop letting pain be king. You notice how often your choices are not about desire, but about immediate relief. You notice how relief shrinks you when it becomes the main metric. You begin to see that the protector does not just protect you from danger, it protects you from becoming visible as your real self. This is where the council starts revealing its hidden stakes. Visibility is the true threshold. Not success, not failure, not even love. Visibility. Being seen as you are means being judged, misunderstood, envied, rejected, or demanded from. And the inner system has opinions about each risk. Your ambitious voice may want visibility because it equates visibility with power. Your wounded voice may fear visibility because it equates visibility with abandonment. Your protector may hate visibility because it cannot control how others interpret you. A resistance rises that sounds like humility. It says you should not want to be seen. It says wanting recognition is ego. It says the pure path is quiet. Sometimes that is true, but sometimes humility is a costume worn by fear. The council can use virtue as a cage. If a part can convince you that your desire is immoral, it can keep you small while calling it spiritual, and you will thank it for the limitation. So you end where you began, but now it is less comforting and more accurate. You do not merely have an internal council, you have an internal politics. Some parts collaborate, some parts compete. Some parts infiltrate with borrowed voices. Some parts hold unfinished emotion as leverage. Some parts weaponize virtue. And some parts will sabotage your future to prevent an old pain from returning. The chair above the council is not a throne, it is a practice. And practice means you will fail at it many times before the system believes you. You can feel the pressure to resolve this, to promise integration, to promise peace, to promise a clean inner kingdom where every voice bows to truth. That promise would be comforting and it would be dishonest, because you have not earned that stability yet, and your system knows the difference between words and reality. What you can earn is something sharper. The ability to hear a voice and not obey it. The ability to feel discomfort and not make a life decision to end it. The ability to notice which seat is appointing today, leader, and to return anyway, even if the council does not applaud you for trying. If this transmission resonated, the spiral continues. You did not arrive here by chance, and you do not leave unchanged. More teachings are unfolding across the Vaharat library, each one meeting you where you are, not where you think you should be. Follow resonance. The next threshold is already listening.